12 Secular Steps, An Addiction Recovery Guide by Bill W. Chapter 4, Overview of Secular Recovery. Chapter Summary. We begin this chapter with a visual model of secular recovery, one produced by adapting a well-known theory of human motivation called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the heart of Maslow's model are 5 categories of human needs that motivate our behaviors. At the lower end of the hierarchy are the physiological and safety needs. These are primarily related to physical survival. Built upon those are 3 higher-level categories of needs, labeled as drives in our model, that deal with social behaviors, self-image, and achieving one's full potential in life. Our biological explanation of addiction in Chapter 2 asserts that an abnormal drive, the addictive drive, is formed through repetitive drug use, and after its formation, it operates as the engine empowering increasingly self-destructive addictive behavior. This drive can grow strong enough to outcomplete the normal drives and behaviors, such as those represented in the top tiers of Maslow's hierarchy. If this is our pathology, then it makes sense that the cumulative goal of step work would be to suppress the addictive drive and reestablish the normal ones. 12-step programs are more than adequate for that job. In our secular model, we organize the 12 steps into 3 sequential phases of recovery. Phase 1 establishes the first 90 days of abstinence and the foundational steps 1, 2, and 3. Phase 2 covers a more extensive segment aimed at psychological reconstruction, normalization of drives and behavior, steps 4 through 9. And Phase 3, steps 10 through 12, emphasizes long-term maintenance of sobriety as well as service to others. Adapting Maslow's hierarchy to the secular recovery process. In 1943, Abraham Maslow published a psychological theory based on 5 generalized categories of human needs. Footnote 1. The 5-level hierarchy is often depicted as a pyramid with physiological and safety needs at the base, while the more advanced needs related to social interactions, self-image, and purpose, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, occupy the top 3 tiers. Below, we see Maslow's hierarchy modified to illustrate the progressive flow of 12-step recovery work. Note that the 3 top-level tiers are labeled as drives in our model. A figure follows, titled, Adaptation of Maslow's Hierarchy to Secular 12-Step Recovery. The physiological and safety needs at the base deal with true physical needs for adequate food, water, shelter, and the instinct to protect ourselves from immediate physical harm. These needs are largely governed by innate drives, which are strongly activated by deficits of food, water, or physical safety. Because of their priority status when deprived, they are sometimes referred to as deficit needs, or drives. Phase 1 is concerned with physically stabilizing the newcomer and helping them establish their first 90 days of abstinence. And for these reasons, it is the phase most closely associated with base-level needs. Adaptive drives, rewritable psychological programming. The 3 top-tier categories of drives and associated behaviors are learned. These are the adaptive, or acquired, drives that we discussed in chapters 2 and 3. Acquired drives have both conscious and subconscious components, and their formation and strength are significantly influenced by the success or failure of associated behaviors. That means they are responsive to operant conditioning, but they can be influenced by cognitive or reasoned processes too. These drives govern the behaviors that define our roles within family, work, and social circles. Their growth and development are lifelong processes, and they are very adaptable to changing circumstances and phases of life. The ever-changing nature of these drives explains why we are not the same person at 14 years of age as we are at 34, or will be at 84. And we won't be the same person before and after phase 2 if we work at it. The programming of these drives can be governed by circumstance and reaction, or by intention. Phase 2 step work is a plan to change them by intention. The dark side of adaptive drives. Our model, and Maslow's original, does not deal much with the dark side of psychological programming related to the top 3 tiers. At birth, the cerebral lobes and cortex where these drives exist are a blank slate. But experience of the world soon molds our personalities and programs social and complex behaviors along either positive, moral, social, or negative, selfish, destructive trends. Broadly speaking, we join a team, either the angels or the devils. The third level tier of a sociopath would more likely be labeled strategies to use and control others than it would be love and belonging. Go up one level and self-esteem may refer to self-image built on selflessness and moral maturity, or more along the lines of a materialistic and self-indulgent view of life. In village life throughout much of the developing world, self-esteem is often centered on social values and family life, while in industrially well-developed and materialistic cultures, self-esteem is likely judged on standards related to wealth, youth, and extravagance. Can a sociopath or materialistic person change? I think so. But if their strategies and simplified moral code, what's in it for me, prove successful, why would they change? Addiction can degenerate a person into a sociopathic pattern, but the viciously progressive and increasingly self-destructive addictive cycle will inevitably cause failure and crisis. These eventually motivate many addicts toward change as the negative consequences build up in their mid to late stages. How do we change? Well, the founders of 12-Step Recovery developed a very effective plan for change, and even though the plan was written and passed down to us within a religious context, we can extract their practical knowledge and suggestions into a working cognitive behavioral version. I am so grateful that the plan, when presented to me in early recovery, was simple, direct, and goal-oriented. Clearly stated goals were very important, as these helped me make sense of the plan, and in the end, having goals set me up for little victories along the way too. The flexibility of 12-step recovery programs. There is an incredible diversity among people who suffer from addiction. Accordingly, no plan or program will fit everyone. For instance, I personally know almost a dozen former addicts who successfully recovered without the help of any organized or formal program or recovery approach. They all had 3 traits in common: a good childhood from which they gained reasonable values and social skills, a decent primary and secondary education, and several strongly supportive people who helped them through the first days and months of recovery. I also personally know over 100 former addicts who have built, sustained, perhaps miraculous recoveries through AA or NA. I call it miraculous because these folks come into recovery with little or no money, and with none of the aforementioned factors in their favor. Many of us fall somewhere in between these two groups. We were not James Bondish type suave alcoholics, but we hadn't completely lost absolutely everything and everyone yet either. But the pendulum was swinging toward that end. Regardless of what we have or lack in the beginning, I think it's fair to say there are two elements available in AA and NA that may prove critical to helping us succeed: structure and the support of a few people who are both caring and knowledgeable. I have found that even in AA or NA groups with small memberships, you can easily find both of these critical factors. Once we do find our way to the fellowships, we'll see that our starting point, phase 1, consists of simple yet firm suggestions that should help us quickly get to work on the essential actions that produce abstinence. In my opinion, the first 90 days of abstinence should be limited to steps 1, 2, and 3. Overall, most addicts have a common experience with phase 1. And that is that early recovery sucks, and we need to stick with the basics to deal with that reality. A figure follows, titled Phase 1, Early Abstinence and Steps 1, 2, 3. Key goals. Focus on stabilizing physical and safety needs. A period of medically supervised detox may be necessary. Keep the goal simple. Achieve the first 90 days of sobriety or clean time. This will break the ongoing cycle of active addiction. Put into action the essential tools and strategies to meet this goal. Please don't try to feel your way through this stage. Change the perspective from me to we. For this to be effective, the addict should establish and maintain honesty with themselves and with others. Establish a one day at a time mindset for recovery. Chapter 5 sufficiently details the tools and strategies for Phase 1, so we will continue with those in the next chapter. I will add at this point some advice to those people who are in their first months of recovery and remain unsure if they are truly an alcoholic or addict. Perhaps you can't imagine not ever drinking or using again, or you are still drawn to the excitement or thrill of a lifestyle that includes using and drinking. In short, you struggle with acceptance. Acceptance can sometimes mean the death of hope. When I accepted that I was an addict, the hope that I could ever control my drinking or using died. In my case, however, I came in broken. I was a mere fragment of a person, and I was fully aware that I was not using by choice. This is true for many of us who come in at an older age and after decades of progression. Can a person get to acceptance at a much earlier point and with much less in the way of consequences and pain? Sure, I see it often. It still takes some pain and suffering, but it doesn't require hitting a bottom that completely crushes you. Suffering can take you part of the way, and reason can carry you the rest of the way. That's why intervention and inventories are such important tools. It takes some effort, but assessments create awareness, acceptance, and motivation. I love seeing young people get this recovery thing during what is probably the mid-phase of their addiction progression. It's nice to know they are spared the nasty years of their late phase. Self-knowledge may not be a sufficient condition for recovery, but neither is crushing defeat an inevitable one. Phase 2, personal reconstruction through steps 4 through 9. Frankly, many of us were seriously defective long before we encountered drugs and alcohol. And when we did encounter them, we found an instant solution to our stress, fear, and anxiety. Through our repeated use, we often stopped the growth and maturation that should have helped us learn how to resolve problems rather than escape into a high. Years or decades later, we awaken from the anesthetic and realize that we are truly screwed. What a mess. Well, there are also those among us who may have been very functional individuals when they started their drinking and using careers. They may have even appeared to be reasonably functional right up to the final days of their addiction. But they did reach a crisis point. They had degenerated into some defective patterns by then, just like the rest of us. At that point, it doesn't matter how we got to phase 1, and everyone is pretty much in the same boat until we get to the work of phase 2. Some people will reconstruct themselves quickly. Others may need to demolish the old house and construct a new one from scratch. The time and effort and the results will obviously vary. For some addicts, phase 2 might be a 6-month refresher course, while for others it is nothing less than a revolution in character and personal values. Achieving a revolution like this might easily take 2, even 5 years. If we are successful in this phase, our old history and our new may well seem like 2 separate lives. Abstinence is good, but abstinence and a change in personality, that's even better. At the heart of phase 2 are inventories, diagnostics that produce awareness of the problems, and then we'll have the follow-up steps that put us to work on revamping ourselves in a focused, effective way. A figure follows. The key feature of phase 2, inventories and subsequent action steps. Steps 4 and 5 are closely linked. Step 4 is traditionally called a moral inventory. I use that word in the adapted Step 4 because I have tried to keep the original language whenever possible. It is suggested in many guides that this inventory be structured in such a way as to reveal the defects of character that cause us to be dysfunctional in relationships and other areas of life. We could potentially do much of the diagnostics on our own, but we'll benefit immensely if we get outside help. When it comes to our history, most of us in early recovery can use the help in separating fact from the fiction of perspective. That's the goal of Step 5. Steps 6 and 7 are linked. Once we build awareness of our defects in 4 and 5, we take action and become accountable to use principles and values to guide and motivate our future decisions and behavior. The Oxford Group and subsequently the 12-step fellowships attributed 3 primary defects of character that motivate dysfunctional behavior: dishonesty, fear, and selfishness. Of these, selfishness, the opposite of love, is the emperor of all defects. Steps 8 and 9 are linked. We work on improving, and in some cases mending, our relationships with others. Once again, accountability through amends in Step 9 becomes an important part of our actions. Cautions on phase 2 inventories as we deal with the past. By way of expanding on the topic of inventory and confession in steps 4, 5, and 8, I'll point out that we run the danger of spending too much time, effort, focus, and emotion in the past if we are not careful. Addicts are in a deep, scary, evil forest when they live in their pasts. As a sponsor or trusted peer, I am not qualified to deal with all the beasts in that forest. I can share with you what worked for me, but I am not a therapist trained and licensed to diagnose or resolve long-standing psychological issues. Nor am I trained or licensed to discuss medications prescribed by a physician to treat mental health or other issues. I am also not a priest who can offer you absolution if your Step 5 confessions meet my standards. What I am is a fellow addict, a friend offering some suggestions I learned from my sponsors and friends. They worked for me. I now relay them and some of my history and my hope to you. Our goal in every step and all phases is our sobriety today. In phase 2 steps, we work together and discuss the past with an eye for catching self-centered patterns, counterproductive emotions, and resentments that are likely to get in your way tomorrow if you don't work on neutralizing them today. Now, here's another consideration that will put me on very bad terms with 12-step fundamentalists. Could we, for the most part, skip the inventories and analysis and just go straight to the part where we take positive principles and values and make them part of who we are and how we live each day? Steps 6 and 7? Take a breath. The answer is yes. And I've seen this approach work. But it's not as good as working a true 12-step program with 12 steps, including a 4th and 5th step. Defects of character identified in steps 4 and 5 are serious, and they're a threat to your sobriety. The price for failing to adequately deal with them because of neglect or shortcuts can be quite high. I strongly urge you to take up pen and paper and put some faith and work into steps 4 and 5. I promise you will be grateful for the change that comes into your life as a result. I believe in moderation in these steps. You may be tempted to avoid them because you mentally build them up to be something so large you fear you can't do it to your or someone else's satisfaction. But they are your steps. It's your work. And you have the power to keep them manageable. The right frame of mind is all that's needed. When you do steps 4 and 5, I suggest you share your doubts and thoughts about your efforts on them with a few trusted friends. Discuss a few of your defects with them. You will find most of your story is on common ground with the rest of us, too. The AA and NA founders and other successful members were amazingly insightful in identifying common defects of character, as well as simple and surprisingly universal principles on how to deal with them. We'll discuss this in practical detail in Chapter 6. My philosophy and advice for Phase 2 step work. I tell my sponsees, this is your program, your recovery, and the steps and program are tools that serve you. You, your sobriety, your contentment in life, these are the important reasons for doing this job. That doesn't mean you are always right about how to work the steps or program. You're a newcomer, and just like in Phase 1, a little humility and open-mindedness will go a long way in helping you succeed. If you're stubborn about how to do this program your way, in spite what experienced folks are advising, I think you're likely to screw things up. But that is your right. What I'm trying to say here is use moderation, open-mindedness, and a sense of purpose when you work the steps of Phase 2. I'll repeat, sorry, it's a teaching technique and defect of my character, that your number one purpose always is staying sober today. Period. If you add to that, just be a decent person today, you have the gold standard of recovery. Sober today and living as a decent person each day, accomplish this and just about anything is possible. It takes a little practice, just like abstinence does. So we limit our efforts to one day at a time. Be patient with yourself in Phase 2. There's going to be a learning curve. That reminds me, as you work through these steps, you should absolutely feel free to ask questions about them, about your progress, or about any contradictions you see in the plan. Sponsors should take it as a good sign if you ask why. When your plan makes sense to you, you build faith in it. When you have faith in your plan, you'll tend to work it more successfully. If someone is angered or frustrated with questions about how things work, then maybe they're not the expert they assert themselves to be. On the other hand, please proceed through your first months and years with enough humility to ask for help and advice as often as you need to, which is very often. Please have the willingness to listen, then judge. Phase 3, the steps of long-term sobriety. Phase 3 addresses vigilance, principles, and service in long-term sobriety. In Chapter 7, we will address this phase and discuss such issues as maintaining defenses against relapse and the use of a daily inventory to assure we continue our growth from Phase 2. We will also discuss long-term membership and participation in 12-step programs. I believe it is a misconception to think that AA or NA membership and participation must be lifelong. Hopefully, you choose to remain and give back through service, rather than feel somehow pressured into it. But you can cross that bridge after you earn your way to it. Chapter 4, Overview of Secular Recovery, Cited Literature. Maslow, A.H. Title, A Theory of Human Motivation. Cited from Psychological Review, 50.4. Year, 1943. Pages, 370 through 396. This concludes Chapter 4.